Good morning. Welcome to Maba today. My Dharma name is Xianxing, and my regular name is Sherrie McMillan. My talk today is going to be the second part of a talk I gave earlier this year. My earlier talk was on Master Zhiyi and the Tiantai school. Mr. Zhiyi lived in the 6th century in China, and he's considered the founder of the Tiantai school, which is one of the most important schools of Buddhism in China. He was born at a time when there was a lot of violence in China. Wars over territories and power, there were book burnings and libraries being destroyed, and he saw many of these things personally. It was also a time when a vast number of Buddhist texts and teachings had been brought to China. Many traditions were being brought to China. And there were arguments, could this text be better? Could that tradition be better? Is this one really Buddhism? Is this one superior? Is that one inferior? Master Zhiyi wrote about a lot of things and wrote many books. But one important thing he wrote about was called One Dharma. He looked at all these different teachings that had come to China, and he saw that all these different teachings were really one Dharma, that all these many Dharmas were one Dharma, and that they were ultimately one vehicle. That there are these various teachings. Each is suited to various people in various circumstances, with various personalities and views and understandings. But they all share the same basis. They all have the same truths. And they all have the ultimate end in mind, which is peace. Many of these teachings are what we call skillful means. We use them when we need them, and when we don't need them anymore, then we don't need to use them anymore. Just like we may need an umbrella if it's raining, but if it's not raining, we don't need an umbrella anymore. We can put it away. Skillful means are often useful to develop a skill, to develop understanding, or to lay a foundation. They may be used in certain circumstances and conditions, but not in others, and that's okay. So, Master Zhiyi said all these dharmas are one dharma. But how do we know what the dharmas are in the first place? There are lots of different teachings in the world from different traditions. Which ones fit with the Buddhist teachings and arise from the Buddhist teachings, and which ones don't? How can we know what is really Buddhist and what isn't? What makes Buddhism different from all the other isms in the world? What ties all these seemingly different Buddhisms together? How do we know when we listen to some teacher, someone who claims to be a teacher, or when we read a book, when we think about joining a sangha or studying with a teacher, how do we know this is the real stuff? Is this guy just making it up on his own? Is this just a big scam? Do these people really know what they're talking about? Well, Buddhism has a long tradition of a lineage of teachers going back to the Buddha. So if we can find a reputable teacher who has studied with another reputable teacher who gave him permission to teach, and he received permission from his teacher, there's a long lineage like that that goes back to the Buddha. And we know that those are Buddhist lineages. So one way to find out if something is truly the Buddhist teaching is to find someone we trust whose knowledge of the Buddhism we respect. But what if that person's not available? Maybe he is visiting Brazil, or she might be in Malaysia. Maybe we don't trust anybody like that yet because we haven't met anyone like that yet. Well, traditionally, the way of knowing if something is consistent with the Buddha's teaching is to see if it is marked with the Dharma Seals. In Buddhism, a thing is considered true only if it is true for everyone, everywhere, all the time, and if it's true for everyone equally. So for instance, I might say something like, when I look up, I see the sun. And that sounds like a true thing. It could be a true thing. But it's not true in this sense. If it's cloudy, I won't see the sun. If it's night, I won't see the sun. If I'm in a building, I won't see the sun. Someone living in another part of the universe might not be a sun. Deep in the ocean, the fish never see the sun. So that's not a truth in this sense. All that is born will die. That's a truth. Because everything that has ever been born has died. There's no one we can find who was born who hasn't died or won't die at some time. So that's the kind of truth we're talking about. All that is made will fall apart. That's a truth. Even the universe is going to fall apart or cease to exist at some time. So nobody, not a single thing, escapes that dissolution. It's true for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And it's equally true for everybody. There's no one who's going to die just a little bit and then keep going. So that's a truth in Buddhism. It's called impermanence. The 4 Dharma Seals are these kinds of truths. And if a teaching or practice is consistent with the Buddha's teaching, it will be marked by these 4 truths. They are impermanence, suffering, no self, and nirvana. Impermanence I already described. And you can see that suffering inevitably arises when we're ruled by our cravings and emotions and act out of ignorance. You can see this because we've just talked about impermanence. Whatever we love, it's going to cease to exist at some point. Whatever we crave, it's going to cease to exist at some point. We'll lose it inevitably. So the shiny new car that we bought will fall apart at some point. A beautiful body will get old. A friend might move to Colorado. My iPhone that I like so much, sooner or later, the apps aren't going to work with it anymore and it won't be much use anymore. So impermanence is equally true for everything. No self is also a Dharma Seal. There is no independent, permanent, unique self. This follows from looking at impermanence. Also, there is no unique thing that stays the same forever. Not only that, all things are interdependent. We all arise because of various things that are going on that come together. We're not a unique, separate thing. We're not just connected, we're all interdependent. And there is no unique thing that stays the same forever. So no self. Nirvana is when the suffering ceases and peace has been found. Nirvana can also be reached by everyone, every being. We all have the potential for this. The only reason we don't have nirvana now is because of our own ignorance, desire, and hate, all the obstructions that we have built up in ourselves. If we reach nirvana while we are alive and we still have a body, that's called nirvana with remainder. When we leave our body behind and are not reborn, we have nirvana without remainder. A Buddha has what is called nirvana without abiding. They don't stay in that perfect tranquility. They come back to help us as we need it. So these are the 4 Dharma Seals: impermanence, suffering, no self, and nirvana. And they're found in all the teachings that are consistent with the Buddha's teaching. So you can use these to determine if something is Buddhist or not. There is a problem, though. What if you don't really understand no self yet yourself? What if you're struggling with the idea of suffering? Maybe you don't quite believe in nirvana yet. What do you do then to figure out what Buddhism is? Well, there are, luckily, lots of teachings from the Buddha himself that we can look at. In any case, we can go directly to the Buddha himself through his teaching. Many of his teachings are preserved as what we call sutras or suttas. They're called sutras in Sanskrit and sutta in Pali, and those are 2 ancient languages in India in which the Buddha's teachings were written down eventually. There are thousands of these sutras. So which one should we use? How do we pick out of all these thousands of sutras? I think 2 of the best ones to use are the first one and the last one. The first one is called Setting in Motion the Wheel of Dharma, or Turning the Wheel of Dharma. And this is the talk that the Buddha gave when he had first become enlightened. You may have heard the story of him sitting under the tree until he had figured everything out. He figured he wouldn't move until he had figured everything out. So he sat, he figured out interdependence, and all kinds of understandings fell into place for him through the night as the night continued. And then he decided that he would teach this to other people. So I'm going to read part of that sutra, and this is a translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi, and it's in his book In the Buddha's Words, which we're using in one of the study groups in the morning. Thus I have heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus of the group of 5 thus: Bhikkhus, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What 2? The pursuit of sensual happiness and sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial, and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nirvana. And what bhikkhus is the middle way, awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, to nibbana? It is this noble eightfold path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This bhikkhus is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata. Now this bhikkhus is the noble truth of suffering, the first noble truth. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. You may notice as I read these noble truths that they are marked by the 4 Dharma Seals that we just talked about. This one is discussing impermanence in relation to suffering. Birth, death, aging, these are all changes that arise with impermanence. Now this bhikkhus is the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the second noble truth. It is this craving which leads to becoming, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the third noble truth. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is this noble eightfold path, that is right view and so on through right concentration. This is the noble truth of suffering. Thus, bhikkhus, in regard to things unheard before, there arose in me vision, knowledge, wisdom, true knowledge, and light. This noble truth of suffering is to be fully understood. Thus, this noble truth of suffering has been fully understood, and so on. This is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. This noble truth of the origin of suffering is to be abandoned, and so on. This is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Thus, this noble truth of the cessation of suffering is to be realized, and so on. This is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering is to be developed, and so on to realization. So long, bhikkhus, as my knowledge and vision of these four noble truths as they really are, in their 3 phases and 12 aspects, was not thoroughly purified in this way, I did not claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment in this world. In this generation, with its ascetics and Brahmins, its devas and humans, but when my knowledge and vision of these four noble truths as they really are, in 3 phases and 12 aspects, was thoroughly purified in this way, then I claimed to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment in this world. The knowledge and the vision arose in me, unshakable as the liberation of my mind. This is my last birth. Now there is no more renewed existence. This is what the Blessed One said. Elated, the bhikkhus of the group of 5, delighted in the Blessed One's statement. And while this discourse was being spoken, there arose in the Venerable Kundana the dust-free, stainless vision of the Dhamma. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. So you see, he understood impermanence, which was his first breakthrough for stream entry. And it goes on to explain what happened with Kundana. And then the Buddha says, Kundana has indeed understood, Kundana has indeed understood. And Venerable Kundana acquired the name Ana Kundana, Kundana who has understood. So this teaching explains things more thoroughly, not just looking at the Dharma Seals as ideas, as we did a moment ago, but explaining them in terms of a practice. He explains about understanding 4 noble truths that are marked by the Dharma Seals. And then he explains how he understood them, going through the phases of realizing them, developing them, and so on. So he's laying out the path that to be followed, and then he goes on to say that the path is the Eightfold Noble Path, and it will take you through all these stages and develop the realization in you, the understanding of impermanent suffering, no self, and nirvana that lead to nirvana itself. So that explains things a little more, but maybe it's still a little too complicated. What if we need things to be explained maybe a little bit more easily than that? Well, there was a time when the Buddha realized he was going to die, and he told this to the Sangha, and they were very upset, of course, because they were going to miss him. They were also worried what they would do when he was gone. How would they know what to practice? After listening to all his teachings for so many years, they were still worried that maybe they would have trouble when he was gone and he wasn't there to tell them. Because they had seen this in other sanghas in ancient India. There were many other groups of teachers and disciples in ancient India at the time. And even in the Buddhist lifetime, they had seen some of these communities fall apart once the teacher had died. The students would begin arguing about what the teachers had actually said, what they had told them to do, who they had picked to be the leader, and so on. And so many communities that looked quite strong, once the teacher was gone, the communities fell apart. So in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha tells his disciples what they can do when he's gone. And I'm going to read a section of it, which was translated by Sister Vajra and Francis Story, which is available on Access to Insight. And I'm reading from the last admonition. So then, Ananda, let us go to the hall of the gabled house in the great forest. And the Venerable Ananda replied, so be it, Lord. Then the Blessed One, with the Venerable Ananda, went to the hall of the gabled house in the great forest. And there he spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, go now, Ananda, and assemble in the hall of audience all the bhikkhus who dwell in the neighborhood of Vasali. So be it, Lord. And the Venerable Ananda gathered all the bhikkhus who dwelt in the neighborhood of Vasali and assembled them in the hall of audience. And then respectfully saluting the Blessed One and standing at one side, he said, the community of bhikkhus is assembled, Lord. Now let the Blessed One do as he wishes. Thereupon the Blessed One entered the hall of audience, and taking the seat prepared for him, he exhorted the bhikkhus, saying, now, O bhikkhus, I say to you that these teachings of which I have direct knowledge, and which I have made known to you, these you should thoroughly learn, cultivate, develop, and frequently practice, that the life of purity may be established and may long endure, for the welfare and happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, well-being, and happiness of gods and men. And what bhikkhus are these teachings? They are the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 constituents of psychic power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the noble Eightfold Path. These bhikkhus are the teachings of which I have direct knowledge, which I have made known to you, and which you should thoroughly learn, cultivate, develop, and frequently practice, that the life of purity may be established and may long endure, for the welfare and happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, well-being, and happiness of gods and men. Then the Blessed One said to the bhikkhus, so bhikkhus, I exhort you, all compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. The time of the Tathagata's parinibbana is near. 3 months hence the Tathagata will utterly pass away. And having spoken these words, the Happy One, the Master, spoke again, saying, my years are now full ripe, the lifespan is short. Departing, I go hence from you, relying on myself alone. Be earnest then, O bhikkhus, be mindful and of virtue pure. With firm resolve, guard your own mind. Whoso untiringly pursues the Dharma and the discipline shall go beyond the round of births and make an end of suffering. So that was a long list that he gave. It's called the 37 Factors of Enlightenment. And I'll go through each of the groups in a little more detail. Because these are the practices that he said, this is what you do when I'm gone, this is what you keep doing. He's not giving them something they have to learn philosophically necessarily. He's telling them what practices they have to keep practicing. So even if we don't have a deep understanding of the philosophy and these other things that we've talked about, if we can at least look at some of these practices and see if something is consistent with these, does it develop these 37 things? And as far as we can tell, it's consistent with the Dharma Seals, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and it's a good Dharma teaching. The first one is the four foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of phenomena or dharmas. And if you've come to Maba very often, you've already heard about all of these many times probably. We've had many retreats on these and many talks on these. And this is an aspect of Buddhism that has made its way into the popular culture. But there are many teachings and many practices on mindfulness that are part of Buddhism. The four right efforts, or the four restraints, which are to not allow negative states to arise, abandon negative states that have arisen, generate wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and do not allow the deterioration of wholesome states that have arisen, but develop them further. Now this is ethics and morality. We're trying to be good, we're trying to do good things, we're trying to stop. So it's ethics, it's morality, it's discipline. And there are a lot of teachings about that in Buddhism also. Although those aren't as popular in our general culture as the teachings on mindfulness and meditation are. The four bases of power: intention, diligence, consciousness, and investigation. We develop these bases of power by concentrating on them, developing them. They're the basis for further developments. Intention, we need to have intention that's good and that's heading in the right direction. We need to be aware of our intentions. Diligence is an energy that we bring to our practice where we don't slack off. Consciousness is working with the mind and understanding the mind, developing the mind. And investigation is thoroughly investigating things. Not just taking them with our habitual thoughts about what things are, but thoroughly investigating things. The five roots or faculties are faith, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Faith in the Buddhist teaching is not faith that you believe just because somebody told you something. It's faith that something works because you have experienced that it works for yourself. It's like you can say, I have faith in gravity because it has never failed me. We see that it works, so we know that it works. Diligence, we just talked about. Mindfulness, I think you're probably already familiar with, and concentration and wisdom. The five roots or faculties are abilities that we've developed. They're getting pretty strong, but they're still kind of fallible. They can still be overcome. You might still have some doubt. You might still be lazy at times. You might not always be mindful, but you're developing those skills. The five powers are the same things as the last five we looked at: faith, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. But they're strong enough to overcome their opposites. So this is faith that overcomes all doubt, diligence that overcomes all laziness, mindfulness that overcomes all inattention or mindlessness, concentration that overcomes all distractions, and wisdom that overcomes ignorance. So the 7 elements of enlightenment, or the 7 factors of enlightenment, are mindfulness, investigation of phenomena, diligence, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. We've also had a number of talks about these at MABA in the past, so I'm not going to talk about them a lot right now. And then the Noble Eightfold Path. And many of you have heard of this before also. It's right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, in Buddhism, we have lots of teachings that are specifically on these things. Like you'll come to a Dharma talk and they'll say this is about the Eightfold Path, or this is about faith, or the talk today is about effort or livelihood. Some of the teachings don't spell out specifically that that's what it is about, though. When you're reading a book, for instance, that says it is a Buddhist book, if you're trying to determine whether or not this is a true teaching in Buddhism, you can examine for yourself, does it work with some of these 37 factors? Is it developing some of these 37 factors? And then as far as you can, you want to look at, does it agree with the 4 Dharma Seals also? Does it work with the 4 Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path? So I often find that these are somewhat easier to understand than some of the more complicated things. For instance, when we hear a teaching on mindfulness or meditation, does the teacher or the book talk about mindfulness of the body, the feelings, the mind, and dharmas? And does the teacher perhaps tie it in at some point with the 4 right efforts? Because we need mindfulness in order to practice the 4 right efforts. If you're not mindful of your body, your mind, your speech, and so on, you can hardly know when a negative state is arising. You know, you will be angry before you even know it. So if we develop mindfulness, we can practice the 4 efforts well. And as I said, sometimes it's not so hard to figure out if it's really Buddhism, because it's talking about one of these 37 elements, or it's specifically talking about the 4 Noble Truths and what have you. Some of the practices, though, aren't like that. For instance, chanting was something that troubled me for a while. It was something I had no interest in for many years. Mindfulness, yes, I liked that. Meditation, yes. Sutras, yes. But I kind of thought, why should I chant? It seems kind of churchy. But we did the chanting here at MABA on Sunday, and I was coming here, so I started chanting. And after a while, I found that I liked it. For one thing, it left me feeling very clear and energized. You know, when I chanted home, I found I had more energy to practice. And I was eager to practice, to sit after I had chanted. I had developed some more diligence because of chanting. Chanting can also help you develop your concentration. You have to pay attention or you will get lost and say the wrong words because you lose your place, especially when you're chanting in a foreign language. And we also learn when we chant. The things we chant are vows, teachings, and practices. We may chant refuge vows. We may chant sutras, like the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra. And we may chant practices, like our metta practices. When you read and study a sutra, and then you chant it in the weeks and months afterward, If you're paying attention, every time you chant it, you're bringing the teaching to mind again. You make it fresh in your mind. Or psychologists might say you are strengthening your neurons when you bring it to mind again. So you make it fresh in your mind. You seal it in your memory so it's always there ready to use. You reinforce and increase your understanding. So I have found chanting to be very profound and very useful. It also makes me feel pretty good. So if we look at the 37 factors, what does this do? Well, we have to be mindful of our speech. We also have to be mindful of phenomenon. If we start getting distracted, we may lose our place in our chanting. We're also practicing right efforts. Because we're paying attention. We're not letting ourselves lose our attention. We're concentrating on the teachings that we're saying when we're chanting. So we're doing something that's good. So I said it certainly helped me with my diligence. And when you keep bringing the teaching to mind, you tend to investigate it more because you're thinking about it frequently. So this helps develop the 5 roots, which can build into the 5 powers. And when some of these things are developed further, we have the 7 elements of enlightenment. And all these things help us to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. So chanting might seem like something that's not really Buddhist specifically, right? It might seem like it's just sort of a religious trapping. You know, when people get a religion, they've got to have some chanting. When they have a religion, they've got to have some robes. When they get a religion, they have to have a building. But these things all have purposes, and they can all help us with the practices and the developments that I've been talking about today. So when you have less understanding, it's easy to dismiss some of these things. But when you examine them in light of the 4 Dharma Seals, the 4 Noble Truths, the 37 factors, we can understand a little better and see that they really are a part of the Dharma, even though they might not have seemed to be that way at first. But these practices are helping somebody find their way on the path of peace. So I hope this will help you in determining what things are practices in Buddhism and what aren't, and what's really Buddhist and what isn't. Sometimes we tend to dismiss something because we think it's a religious thing or a thing for that culture, but all these things are really part of the practice that helps someone in those circumstances develop themselves on the path of peace. So may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings know the great joy that is free from suffering, and may they dwell in the equanimity that is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance.